right, Job chapter 23, let's call this one Chipping Away No More. A final response as Job says, today also my complaint is bitter. Oh, that I knew where I would be able to find God. Once again, he says, I would bring my case before him. And Job is going to go on to say that I am confident I would be acquitted. However, he's going to go on in verse 8 to say, behold, I go forward, but he is not there. And backward, but I do not perceive him. On the left hand, when he is working, I do not behold him. He turns to the right hand, but I do not see him. All setting up the famous verse 10, where it says, but he knows the way that I take, and when he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. Once again, letting us know that Job understands that he is in a holding pattern and he needs to wait. But he says toward the end of the chapter that he is committed to wait. Moreover, at this point, as we mentioned, in spite of all that he has been through, he has committed that he is going to hold to God's ways and his commandments as he waits, understanding that he knows that God is going to finish what he has started in him. And even though he says he is terrified at what God might do next, he is not going to remain silent. Not so much that he is going to continue complaining or pointing his finger and blaming God and questioning him, but in a way that really reminds me of something that Jesus actually said in Luke chapter 18 in a famous parable he told about a widow, beginning in verse 1, where it reads, and he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. In verse 6, and the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? And please don't confuse that whole concept of speedily with it won't take very long, because the speed with which he answers does not mean that he will not delay and keep us in holding patterns, much like Job. Understanding that by the end of this conversation, God comes quickly to answer Job, even though Job had to wait a while. And so part of our maturity is much like Job, understanding that sometimes we will have to wait a while, but when God answers, it can come surprisingly quick. And that's, of course, skipping to the end of the story, how it ends for Job. He does not wait in vain, but understanding that Jesus 3 times in that parable emphasized the fact that she was asking for justice, that the king was willing to give her justice, even though he wasn't necessarily a just king. And finally, Jesus used that parable to emphasize the fact that God is willing to give justice to his people. That points back to what we seem to be seeing in Job chapter 23, when he says, while I wait, I will hold to God's ways. Meaning, later on, he's going to talk about, once again, he is not going to let go of his integrity, even though he is suffering. He understands that if he's going to ask God for an answer, he needs to carry himself in a way that God respects while Job waits. And does that mean that Job was sinless or perfect as he waited for God to respond? No, we've already seen some things that suggest Job at some points thinks that God is unjust, and he's going to question God in some ways that seem pretty pointed, if not slightly rude. However, when God shows up towards the end, he is going to address Job's 3 friends, as we mentioned before, in his burning anger, as it says in chapter 42, round about verse 7, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Understanding that Job made some mistakes, if not some sins, in the way he has addressed God and in the things he said about God. It doesn't seem like they were all true. However, because Job maintained his integrity, it looks like God was willing to focus on what Job did right, and understanding that there was a process that God was putting him through. So no matter what Job had wrong about God, he served God with a level of integrity that provoked God to give him both justice and mercy when God finally showed up to respond to his needs. Which is why we're getting back into the habit of sometimes saying, my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that God willing, we will allow him to lead us into levels of integrity that will encourage him to give us both justice and mercy as he responds to our needs.